Pam Bondi's decision not to stand in that courtroom was not a spontaneous act of defiance. It was a calculated and deeply personal stand for integrity. In a setting where tradition often overshadows truth, her choice was about more than just posture. It was a symbol. For decades, courtrooms have upheld rituals as markers of respect. From the formal language to the rigid dress codes, everything is designed to convey order and reverence for the law. But what happens when that respect is expected, even demanded, for individuals who no longer uphold the values they represent? In that moment, the expectation was simple. When the judge enters, everyone stands. It's routine, almost automatic. But Pam paused. She evaluated what standing would mean, not just symbolically but personally. Would it suggest endorsement? Would it signify that she, too, was willing to uphold appearances over truth? She understood that to rise in that moment was to participate in the illusion that everything in that courtroom was functioning as it should. That justice was alive and well, and those at the helm of it were beyond reproach. Instead, she made a decision grounded in integrity. She understood that respect, especially in the judicial system, must be earned. When individuals in powerful positions misuse their authority, the consequences are far-reaching. Trust in the system begins to erode, and without trust, even the most beautifully worded laws fall flat. Her refusal to stand was a direct challenge to the notion that title alone deserves honor. It wasn't about causing a scene. It was about refusing to perpetuate a lie. By choosing to remain seated, she highlighted an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes tradition can shield corruption. It's easy to hide behind protocols. When everyone is doing what they've always done, no one stops to ask whether those actions still align with the values they're supposed to represent. Her stillness was a quiet demand for accountability, a reminder that ritual should reflect reality, not mask it. And it wasn't an easy choice. In environments like a courtroom where hierarchy is strict and deviations are rare, even a small act of non-compliance can feel seismic. But that's what made it so powerful. She wasn't just questioning one moment. She was questioning a culture. A culture that too often asks professionals to stay quiet, to follow procedure, to look the other way when something feels off. Her action was rooted in a deep respect, not for tradition, but for truth. She believes in the law. She believes in justice. But belief doesn't mean blind allegiance. In fact, real belief requires the courage to confront what's broken. Pam's integrity wouldn't let her stand for someone who didn't embody the very principles they were supposed to protect. This wasn't about drama. It was about values. She knew her decision would draw eyes, maybe even criticism, but she also knew that leadership means doing what's right, not what's easy, especially when no one else is willing to go first. Integrity, after all, isn't tested when things are simple. It's tested in the moments where doing the right thing is inconvenient, unpopular, or even risky. Pam Bondi didn't need to raise her voice or point fingers. Her statement came through action, or more accurately, through inaction. And in a space governed by rules and appearances, that kind of clarity is rare. It's what sets apart those who follow the law from those who embody its highest ideals. In the courtroom, where every gesture is loaded with meaning, the distinction between moral compass and legal formality often blurs. For many, following protocol becomes second nature, an unspoken agreement that the rules, the rituals, and the routines are non-negotiable. But Pam Bondi's choice to remain seated disrupted that norm. It forced a re-examination of what we value more, adherence to custom or adherence to conscience. Pam's decision wasn't rooted in rebellion or defiance for its own sake. It came from a place of discernment. She understood the rules. She respected the system. But she also recognized that respect for the law is not the same as reverence for those who manipulate it. Legal formality asks that participants in the courtroom follow certain procedures without question. Moral compass, on the other hand, demands that we pause when something feels fundamentally wrong, even if it's wrapped in the appearance of legitimacy. She was faced with a choice that legal professionals rarely confront so publicly. Follow the script, or listen to that inner voice that says, This isn't right. In her case, remaining seated was a moral calculation. Standing would have signified complicity. It would have given silent approval to a process or a person that, in her view, had violated the core of what justice is supposed to be. She wasn't just asking herself what was legal. She was asking what was ethical. That moment shines a light on a larger issue within institutional systems. Often, legal formality is treated as the gold standard, as if following the rules is always equal to doing the right thing. But history and everyday experience tells us otherwise. There have been countless times when laws upheld injustice, when procedure was used to suppress truth. In those moments, it's not enough to say, "I followed the rules." Real accountability demands we ask whether the rules themselves, and the people enforcing them, deserve our compliance. Pam's refusal to stand was not a rejection of law and order. It was a call to return to the principles that law and order are supposed to protect. Justice, fairness, transparency, these aren't just lofty ideals. They are the foundation of trust in legal institutions. When that foundation cracks, people like her are faced with a dilemma: conform for the sake of stability, or challenge for the sake of integrity. What made her decision even more meaningful was its subtlety. She didn't interrupt proceedings. She didn't stage a protest. She simply chose not to rise. That act, though quiet, spoke volumes. It suggested that moral authority does not always align with legal hierarchy, and that sometimes, to preserve the dignity of the law, one must break from its traditions. Her actions raised difficult questions for others in the courtroom. Was standing truly a sign of respect, or had it become a reflex stripped of meaning? Did following protocol mean you stood behind everything happening within those walls? Or could silence or stillness be a more powerful expression of ethical concern? It takes courage to ask these questions in a setting where conformity is rewarded and deviation is penalized. But those who work within systems have a unique power. They can expose the gap between what the system claims to stand for and how it actually operates. Pam chose to use that power not with outrage, but with integrity. She understood that the moral compass does not always point in the same direction as the rulebook. In the end, her decision was a reminder that while law is enforced by authority, justice is guided by conscience. And when the two are in conflict, it is the compass of moral clarity, not the comfort of formality, that must lead the way. Courtrooms are built on silence. Silence during testimony. Silence while rulings are read. Silence when authority enters the room. It's a silence that commands order, but it also carries an expectation. Don't disrupt. Don't challenge. Just follow the script. In that space, courage becomes an invisible currency, rare, valuable, and sometimes costly. Pam Bondi's decision to remain seated in such a tightly controlled environment wasn't just noticeable, it was extraordinary. Because she did what most people in that room wouldn't dare to do. She broke the silence in a way that made no sound. It wasn't loud, but it was bold. And in systems built on silence and compliance, even a quiet refusal can shake the foundation. Her act wasn't theatrical. It wasn't disruptive in the traditional sense, but that's what gave it weight. It was courage, wrapped in discipline. Stillness, when expected to move. Restraint, when pressured to conform. In a world where professional survival often depends on blending in, she did the exact opposite. She stood out by sitting down. The legal system, by its very structure, encourages uniformity. You're expected to stand when told, speak when prompted, dress a certain way, act a certain way. And over time, those expectations aren't just rules. They become habits. Habits that go unquestioned. But Pam challenged that norm with a single decision. She made it clear that she would not stand for something, or someone, that violated the ethical standards she holds close. That's not an easy stance to take, especially for someone in her position. Courtrooms are hierarchical, and challenging that structure often comes with risks, social, professional, even legal. Most people keep their heads down, even when they know something isn't right. They convince themselves that speaking out, or even subtly resisting, won't change anything, that it's not worth the fallout. But silence, especially in the face of wrongdoing, is not neutral. It protects power. It preserves the illusion that everything is fine. Pam refused to be part of that illusion. She used her position not to insulate herself, but to set an example. Her courage wasn't just about one act. It was about disrupting a culture of silence that allows corruption to survive under layers of ritual and routine. She knew the likely reaction: disapproval, tension, maybe even consequences. But she also knew the cost of staying quiet, of standing up quite literally for someone who no longer deserved the gesture. It's important to understand that her choice wasn't impulsive. It was thoughtful, deliberate, a calculated act of conscience. She weighed what was expected of her against what she believed was right, and she chose the harder path, not just for herself, but for the integrity of the system she serves. She wasn't trying to destroy trust in the legal process. She was trying to restore it by refusing to lend respect where it had not been earned. What made her courage so impactful was that it created a moment, a pause, a crack in the script. People in the courtroom noticed. They shifted in their seats. They wondered why. They felt the unease that comes when someone breaks formation. And that's exactly the kind of discomfort that leads to change. Because when one person acts with conviction, it gives others permission to question, to reflect, to reconsider what they've accepted without thought. In a system where fear often dictates behavior, and silence is mistaken for professionalism, Pam showed that true professionalism sometimes requires risk. Not dramatic outbursts, not grand declarations, but quiet defiance rooted in principle. She reminded everyone in that room and beyond that courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it looks like staying seated when the world expects you to rise. Pam Bondi's simple act of remaining seated became a spark that lit a fire far beyond the courtroom walls. In that quiet, deliberate moment, she created a ripple effect, one that stirred both the public consciousness and the internal mechanics of the legal system. Her decision challenged not just the immediate authority in front of her, but also the deeply rooted expectation that compliance is the only acceptable behavior in professional environments. What followed revealed something profound: that a single moment of integrity can send shockwaves through multiple layers of society, forcing institutions and individuals alike to examine their own alignment with justice. The courtroom is designed to be a place of order. Every movement, every phrase, every symbol reinforces a hierarchy that has long been accepted as necessary. Within that space, silence is often equated with respect, and respect with agreement. But what happens when that structure is disrupted? Not by a loud objection, but by stillness. Pam's decision caught people off guard because it wasn't loud or brash. It was elegant in its restraint and powerful in its message. And while some within the courtroom may have seen it as inappropriate or unprofessional, others saw it as something else entirely: necessary. Outside those four walls, the public took notice. Her actions quickly became a topic of conversation, drawing in those who were tired of watching institutions protect their own, while the truth remained buried. In coffee shops, on social media, across dinner tables, people were talking not just about what she did, but why she did it. They saw someone who refused to betray her values for the sake of protocol, and they admired that. For many, her decision resonated with frustrations they had long carried, but didn't have the platform or the position to express. And while public support may have offered validation, it also created tension within legal and professional circles. Pam's refusal to follow tradition opened the door for others to begin asking difficult questions. What is the purpose of these rituals if they serve to shield wrongdoing? Is it possible to uphold the dignity of the law without pretending every actor within the system is beyond reproach? These weren't questions people were used to asking, especially not out loud. But once she broke the silence, it became harder to ignore the contradictions. Her act pushed the system into a state of unease. Some saw her as a disruptor, threatening the stability of the courtroom with personal opinion. But others understood that true stability doesn't come from silence, it comes from accountability. Her choice highlighted the difference between order and justice. Order can be enforced. Justice must be earned. And when the two come into conflict, A system that values integrity must be willing to examine itself. Even among colleagues and peers, her actions set a precedent. It suggested that ethical resistance has a place in professional environments, even those bound by strict formalities. She didn't ask others to follow her lead. She didn't rally support or organize dissent. But by simply doing what felt right, to her, she gave quiet permission for others to consider doing the same in their own way. That's the nature of moral courage. It inspires without demanding. Pam Bondi reminded the legal world and the public that the courtroom is not immune to ethical scrutiny. The people who work within it are not above being questioned. And the symbols we've come to accept, standing, silence, routine, should not be mistaken for justice itself. Her small act created a very big conversation, one that made many realize that change doesn't always begin with a roar. Sometimes it starts with someone choosing not to stand. Sometimes it only takes one moment to shift the energy in an entire room. One decision, seemingly small, can become the catalyst for a much larger movement. That was the impact of Pam Bondi's quiet refusal to stand in a courtroom where everyone else followed the routine. It was not the act itself that made waves, it was what it represented. In that single moment, she showed that even in the most rigid environments, one person's resolve can start to unravel a culture of unquestioned conformity. In a world where large-scale change often feels daunting or out of reach, there is immense power in the individual gesture. Pam didn't deliver a speech. She didn't confront anyone directly. All she did was remain seated. But because of who she is and where she did it, the effect was profound. Her stillness became a statement, and that statement refused to be ignored. It was a reminder that actions don't have to be loud to be revolutionary. Sometimes the most impactful resistance is subtle, but rooted in deep personal truth. When a person with experience, credibility, and visibility chooses to act against the grain, it challenges the assumption that everyone is satisfied with the status quo. It interrupts the idea that compliance means consensus. Her decision sparked discomfort in some, admiration in others, and curiosity in many. It forced people to look again at a system they had grown used to. It made them ask themselves whether they had ever stood for something or someone they didn't truly believe in simply because it was expected. This is where the ripple effect becomes real. When someone witnesses an act of moral clarity, it stays with them. Even if they don't speak up immediately, even if they remain seated or silent themselves, the memory lingers. They begin to rethink their own boundaries. They start to wonder what they would do in a similar situation. Pam's action planted those seeds in countless minds. It didn't tell people what to think. It encouraged them to think more deeply. Institutions, especially legal ones, are designed to resist change. They are built on precedent, on tradition, on the assumption that the way things have always been done is the way they should continue. But people like Pam challenge that logic. She showed that tradition without accountability can be dangerous. That respecting a system doesn't mean blindly participating in every part of it, and that sometimes honoring justice requires rejecting the symbols that no longer reflect it. The real shock wasn't just her refusal to stand, it was the chain reaction it set off. Some people felt uncomfortable, not because she disrupted the courtroom, but because she disrupted what they had come to accept as normal. Others felt empowered. They saw her restraint as an invitation to find their own courage in their own way. For those watching closely, it was a lesson in how leadership doesn't always announce itself. It reveals itself in the quiet decisions that carry weight. Pam's choice showed that it doesn't take a crowd to make a statement. It doesn't require mass protest to start a conversation about ethics, integrity, and reform. All it takes is one person willing to draw a line, and then hold it, even when everyone else is moving in the other direction. Her refusal wasn't about creating spectacle. It was about anchoring herself in her values. And in doing so, she reminded others that change often begins in moments that look small from the outside, but carry enormous moral gravity within. Pam Bondi's decision may have seemed simple, just a refusal to stand, but its impact reached far beyond the moment. In a world where appearances are often mistaken for truth, her quiet act reminded us all of the value of authenticity. It was not about rebellion for its own sake. It was about principle. It was about choosing conviction over comfort, values over vanity, and truth over tradition. In doing so, she became a mirror to a system that often demands respect, even when it forgets how to earn it. What made her action resonate so deeply was the fact that it challenged a culture of silence. In courtrooms, institutions, and even workplaces, people are often conditioned to follow routines, even when those routines protect what should be questioned. Pam's stillness was a pause that broke the rhythm of that culture. She wasn't trying to be dramatic, she was trying to be honest. And in a space governed by decorum and restraint, honesty can be the most disruptive force of all. This wasn't about refusing to follow rules for attention. It was about asking a deeper question: who and what are we standing for? When the answer becomes unclear, when integrity is compromised by those in power, then the most respectful act may be to step back, not step in line. Pam's quiet defiance reminded people that symbols mean nothing without the values they're supposed to represent. And when those values are absent, it's not disrespectful to refuse to participate. It's necessary. The courtroom is supposed to be a place of truth. But the truth isn't always in the words spoken aloud. Sometimes it's found in what someone doesn't do. In the silent choices, the stillness, the refusal to comply with something that goes against conscience. Pam chose to uphold the truth, even when it made her the outlier. And that's what makes her action so powerful. Not that she broke a rule, but that she stood firm in a system that often rewards those who stay quiet. What she did took courage. And courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, "Not this time. Not like this." Her refusal to rise was not a rejection of justice, but a demand for it. It was a call for accountability in a system that must constantly be reminded of its own responsibility. And while others may have stood out of habit or fear, she remained seated out of principle. Her choice sparked a conversation, not just about one moment, but about the larger question of how we respond when systems fail us. Do we follow the routine, or do we follow our conscience? Pam Bondi showed that change doesn't always come from grand speeches or public protests. Sometimes it begins with the quiet strength of one person who chooses to act differently. And that choice, as simple as it seemed, became a powerful reminder. Integrity is not a performance. It's a decision, made again and again, even when no one else makes it with you.